Hello there, glad to see you can make it today. Welcome to a video of more intriguing prospects. Like the personality based off your favourite Blue Dot characters of old, today we will be diving into our allocative side. Zodiac signs, better known among casual consumers as star signs, are elaborate and yet evidential astrological markings that pave the way for your birth to signify what constellation you fall under. You might be asking, well, I know my star sign, and Blue Dot characters already have their star signs. What's the purpose of this video? Well, dear viewer, I'm glad you asked. Not only have I taken it upon myself to study the main traits and personalities each star sign has the privilege to represent, but I also took Blue Dot characters and associated them with these new areas. The current Blue Dot character star signs that they have aren't usually representative of their clear dominant personalities, but I will do the favour for you all and find out, with research that I've done, as well as some help from others, the most common and dominant characteristics in which characters from the series display to say which star sign they fall under most, so you can feel a sense of relation to a small group of characters. Before watching this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The support would be out of this world for me to receive, and I will promise you I can return the favour with more videos in the future. Now, let us start. There are 12 recognised and accepted star signs to go through. To list them all, we have Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So let us start off with Aries, which applies to those born between March 21st and April 19th. This constellation is a fire sign. They are bold and headstrong, rushing in without thinking and usually burn out quickly. They are known to be very black and white on issues, meaning there's no room for nuance or grey areas. They are ambitious and hate losing and/or backing down. They tend to also treat everything as a game that could be one relating to a high level of competitiveness. Most interestingly though, egoists tend to emulate or prioritize some of these traits over ones that may be more fundamental to their characteristics outside of intense match environments. So at face value, a lot of Blue Lockers would relate to this as a secondary or even a primary star sign if the ones I allocate them aren't satisfactory to you all, but this is all considering the traits that I have read. The characters I related to this are the likes of Rin, specifically after the Japan U20 match, and Raichi. Rin has always been someone who strives for competition, in which for his case can be heavily interpreted as intertwined with life or death, which relates to that highly competitive spirit. Not to mention, he is definitely bold. In fact, I would call him bluntly bold. He does tend to rush into things, and he's very much craving a new desire and hates backing down from a head-on-head challenge, or even a physical crash course. Burning out quickly may not apply to him, but if anything, he embodies the mindset of Blue Lock most out of all of the characters, so if I was to say who is the biggest egoist, it's a toss-up between Isagi and Rin at this point in the story. Raichi from earlier on in the series has definitely been bold and rash. He has a lot of arrogance and isn't too accepting of any ideas or opinions that doesn't come from him primarily unless they were beneficial to him. He is also certainly headstrong, as he was always determined to do things his way despite other wishes. He was willing to work with Isagi to appear more helpful in the match against Ubers, but he was given quite the impossible challenge and took it head on with the information he was provided, and it worked as best as it could for a player of his caliber. Just a heads up, not all primary traits will match every character, but it's the majority of the traits or specific ones that heavily feeds into my decision making process, and also that the character just wouldn't fit anywhere else. Next up is Taurus, which applies to those born between April 20th and May 20th. This constellation is an earth sign. They are strong, reliable, and warm-hearted. They do things slowly and methodically. They don't necessarily like change or can adapt to it as easily. And finally, they invest in things that have substance, which means putting your time towards achieving your goals. The characters I had related towards Taurus are Gargamaru, Kunigami, and Fukaku. Gargamaru is here simply because he feels like the active representation of this star sign. He is strong, reliable, and warm-hearted. He's befriended bears after wrestling them, so that's definitely something. Doing things slowly seems like very him, considering outside of games seems, he doesn't approach things with anxiety. Even the action of him eating is all done by hand, which also leans into that methodical trait where he does things orderly and systematically. He doesn't adapt well to changes emotionally, which is likely why he was among the most upset of the group for the missing members of Team Z after the second selection. And of course, he would only work on aspects of himself if it meant he can play in matches, and goalkeeping was his best chance to play on the pitch, so he continued to improve his reflexes and flexibility to be an ideal goalkeeper. Konagami is a more complicated one. I think this all does apply to him, but it applies to him most if speaking on his pre-wildcard representation. I don't necessarily think he applies anywhere else as much either, so I thought this would be a good place for him. And Fukaku is a character we don't have much on, so his personality is fairly unclear. But as an older player who is unwilling to stray away from his goalkeeping roots, he likely doesn't want to embrace change. This was also just an opportunity to cement him somewhere so he couldn't be left out. Next on the list is Gemini, and this applies to those born between May 21st and June 20th. This constellation is an air sign. They commonly deal with stimulation and adaptability. They take in information from as many different sources as possible, as if their brains are always active and aware. They are detail orientated and curious as to how things work. They make connections to find solutions, and they can sometimes be unstable, so along with that, they can sometimes also be seen as two-faced. The characters I related towards Gemini are Isugi, Nico, Agi, and Noah. These characters seem to be a bit more self-explanatory in why they are here, Isugi quite especially considering all the stated qualities are applicable to him. In regards to being seen as two-faced, his attitude on and off the pitch, both in the heat of the situation and more thoughtful, are vastly different in terms of confidence and approachability. As for Nico and Agi, I feel as if they also fall under adaptable and analytical players. Agi is especially detail-orientated and likes to know how things work as part of his doctor nickname. He even said to Kaiser during the Bastard vs Manshine game that he will be focusing on analysing him when facing him. And Nico with Metavision of course has the trait of taking in as much information around him as possible, and as a defender he needs to make connections to find solutions in order to appropriately stop or counter a push. Finally for Noah, we can already know where the two-faced trait comes from, but also we know him to be curious in players' processes and how they come to their own logical conclusions. He took interest in learning about Metavision and more specifically Isugi's way of interpreting the ability, which seemingly was something he was unaware of either due to his allies not possessing such an ability or him simply not caring enough, as it stands as something in which even with its existence he has yet to be surpassed or challenged by a player with it aside from Snuffy. Not to mention the whole using Isugi for Kaiser's benefit makes him active and aware in the process of how they were actively pushing each other, so he started growing and adapting the environment to favour their ever-growing feud. Next on our list is Cancer, and this applies to those born between June 21st and July 22nd. This constellation is a water sign. They are commonly linked to protection and cultivation. They tend to approach issues indirectly, meaning you add some kind of buffer or padding before you deliver your message or an action. Cancers are usually emotionally generous and tend to tie themselves to others to find their place. And finally, they are prone to emotional fluctuations and manipulation. The characters I'd related to Cancer are Ryo, Ness, Tokimitsu, and Lorenzo. Ryo and Ness have especially found their places in the world by sticking to either their treasure or magic wielders respectively, and would tend to either be overbearing or overly reliant on their discoveries. I don't associate Ryo as an indirect person with how he speaks to others, but he definitely chose to make Nagi hate him instead of expressing how he truly felt. It's more of him coming to realize the lack of stability Kaiser has, and instead of outright insulting him for not being as competent as Ness thought he could be, he still softens the blow by wanting to stick by his side to make magic. Also, the emotional fluctuations and manipulation is definitely what they both are victim to at some points in the series. Tokimitsu was a character I believe stability-wise, I could not put anywhere else. Considering his anxiety, he would definitely fall victim to emotional fluctuations and manipulation. He also tied himself as much as possible to Rin to try and survive instead of addressing his own shortcomings, and certainly indirectly approaches those issues at hand. Lorenzo is one that needs some explaining, but I hope you all can don't understand where I'm coming from. Using knowledge from both his backstory and the Neo-Egoist Bible, he has likely been taken advantage of. He's expressed how he falls in love or grows attached too easily, which would lead to his heart being broken. But the reason why we don't actively see him fall for manipulation now is because he's under the tutoring of an actual considerate and mature player in Snuffy. Not to mention, that protection aspect directly ties into his role as a defender, and through that he needs to tie himself to other players in order to be as effective as possible, as we see with Baru and Lorenzo's dynamic. Next up is Leo, and this applies to those born between July 23rd and August 22nd. This constellation is a fire sign. They possess creativity and regularity traits. They are courageous and try to uphold a consistent image for themselves. They are natural leaders with encouragement of self-expression whilst being sensitive to feedback. And finally, they are able to take the spotlight away from things that matter to others. The characters I had related to the Leo sign are Aiku, Loki, Sendo, Luna, Lavinio, and Unazi. Aiku, as we know, is a natural leader. It's why he's still got that captain band on in the current story. He's also courageous in a way that he's unwilling to back down from a challenge or changing circumstances. He puts on a brave face for his team, as holding it together is a significant part of being a captain, which therefore upholds a consistent image. We also see him in taking and adjusting to feedback and criticism throughout the U20 match, which is among a different definition or interpretation of being sensitive to getting feedback, where it's contemporary. Where originally he doesn't allow Shido on the field so he can encourage and utilize his team and their playstyles, he does take Insai's request and agrees to bend it if the U20 team begins to break. When that inevitably happens throughout the first half, we can see Aiku conforming to the request, regardless of the slight it may have against his team. For Loki, I had to put him here due to sharing these qualities in a different manner. He's going to be a natural leader because he's so good, and that responsibility has to land on him if his club and country hope for Loki to be their reason to carry them to a victory. Basically, he's naturally in that position because of how consistently amazing he is. Loki is also one to take the spotlight, as he's unintentionally flashy due to how fast he is, and will always keep a majority of fan attention when on the pitch, as otherwise people can lose track of when he pops up out of nowhere. Not to mention, he's definitely sensitive to feedback, but more in a childish way, as the one and only time we saw him get verbally challenged back, he looked like he was about to blow a fuse. For Sendo, he's definitely one of those characters I put here due to his immaturity, such as with Loki, but having the experience to be a natural leader as a former ace striker. I mean, he was enough to be a representative to even be one of the 4 characters to be in the U20 World Cup press conference. Luna is not too dissimilar to the presentable nature of Loki on the surface, with a hidden edge in which makes him more cunning and manipulative to our outside perspectives. Considering I just think Loki and Luna currently have a lot more alike on the surface, alongside the limited information we have on how Luna reacts to being challenged, but he definitely holds some level of accountability as a leader of Real, so I place him under this constellation to be safe. Lavinio, whilst not wanting to be a leader and not actually teaching his team anything during the NEL, he was naturally selected to be a leader for the NEL anyhow with his role as master, but he's openly admitted he only cares for himself as he believes he is the best in the world. So he's seeking to take that spotlight away from Noah, and in addition to that, one of Spain's values as a country when it comes to football is creativity, so Luna and Lavinio were easier to put here because of that trait relating to the clubs that they played for guaranteed. And for Luna's case, that also includes the country, because yes, I know, Lavinio plays for the Brazilian national team in the World Cup. And finally for Onazi, we don't have much on him, but with how he's been presented thus far in the story, he is a shining beacon of hope for Nigeria, who looks to take the majority of the load for his team to carry them to victory. That constant responsibility would weigh on him, yes, but he is a natural leader because of it, and most definitely has to hold it together to maintain as that beacon of hope. Not to mention, he is actively within the spotlight from the momentum he's been carrying since the start of this latest match. Next up on our list is Virgo, and this constellation applies to those born between August 23rd and September 22nd. This constellation is an earth sign. They have active discernment, they have a defined idea of purity and will do whatever it needs to acquire it. They are detail orientated and overly critical. They focus on being efficient, consistent and high quality, quality, and they tend to lose sight of the bigger picture. This star sign was applicable to both Baru and Chris Prince. When going through all of these traits, a few discretions could stand out, such as Baru having his own defined idea of purity, and purity quite usually means a sense of freedom, which wouldn't seem too relative to the restrictive Baru, but what's important is that it's its own defined idea of it. It's up to interpretation what he defines as pure. You could say, as much as it may be contradictory, his darkness is pure and he needs the light to contaminate it so he may feed off that essence, because purity is also free from that of pollution, and since Baru actively finds freedom uncomfortable, he must strive for this version of purity to play at his best, which is why he rejected Snuffy's tactics to favour his wicked path. We should also know Baru has a strict training regimen to keep his body in peak condition, and that detail orientation can stem from that OCD side of him we see from his cleanliness, which is another example of that possible purity under a different context. Efficient, consistent, and high quality. I mean, his performance in the NEL shows a high quality consistently, as he scored at least 2 goals every match he's been a part of. Also, quite literally, he can lose sight of the bigger picture. Predator's Eye does that to a man. But also, a lot of people like to say that if Baru was willing to balance the active structure of Snuffy strategies with his restrictive ego type, maybe he would be much more of a capable player. Chris Prince, to be brief, is very much more of a physically extreme version of Baru when it comes to training routines and detail orientation, as he specifically constructed training drills to fit Manshine players' strengths to build their peak physicalities to better achieve their ideals. Plus, losing sight on the bigger picture is what Prince was seen doing when proving his superiority over Noah, which led to his illogical weapon, which led to his shot being blocked, which is a huge drift away from the favouring of the future potential of players he prioritised in Manshine's last match. Marking the halfway point, we have Libra. People born between September 23rd and October 22nd fall under this sign. Libra is an air sign. These individuals tend to embody the concepts of justice and harmony. They aim to bring stability to what they do, attempting to understand and intake all viewpoints, even going as far as to play devil's advocate to make sure every voice is heard. They have a strong sense of aesthetics and cohesion, but as an air sign, they struggle to be decisive or commit to long-term friendships. The characters who I felt best embody this sign are Nagi, Kyura, Ryu, and Atoya. At first glance, Nagi may not seem like he fits the concept of a Libra. However, when you take into account that stress puts your body into a state of disharmony, the pieces begin to fall into place. Nagi's idea of harmony is a state of relaxation. He flows and shifts through issues without putting in much effort, as we've seen heavily in the first and the beginning of the second selections. He does attempt to take in other people's viewpoints and doesn't shy away from people who think differently from him, but he still prioritizes a sense of harmony. Additionally, Nagi's weapon is trapping, a technique that stabilizes the ball and allows a sort of reset in his momentum. Furthermore, we see Nagi as a visual learner, seeing and recreating things that he sees other people do on the pitch. The last of the Libra point fits almost to a T. Nagi's indecisiveness and struggle to commit to Blue Lock and its ideals is what inevitably got him locked off at the end of the NEL. Not to mention, as much as he appreciates and cares for Rayo, he left Rayo in the second selection without much thought, showing once again a struggle to commit to people long term. Kyura by comparison is much more stereotypically a Libra. Kyura lives on the borderline, making decisions after weighing the options and deciding who to pitch his bets with. On top of this, Kyura tends to hedge his bets with the underdog, almost playing devil's advocate to be accredited as the reason for their success. Other than these pinpoint decisions, Kyura tends to not choose sides and flow along the tightrope of allegiances. Additionally, Kyura's playstyle involves a lot of core strength and quick touches to bring out his vision. Despite his smaller figure, these features make him a stable and free-flowing presence on the field. Ryu and Atoya aren't so blatantly obvious as Kyura and Nagi, but it makes the most sense to put them under this sign. Ryu very obviously embodies the aesthetic part of the sign, constantly striving to be as stylish as possible. In addition to that, his jumping and trapping abilities also demonstrate a sense of harmony in how he uses his body and forms with the ball. Atoya's connection to the Libra sign comes more from what we know about his relationships with women. He very obviously has a strong appreciation for the prettier things in life, and as we've been told, he struggles to commit to any one relationship for very long. We also never see Atoya take any kind of firm, unchangeable stance within the series. He mostly tends to go with the flow and work around the other people on the field. The next star sign to cover is Scorpio, and this one applies to those born between October 23rd and November 21st. This constellation is a water sign. They have a strong aspect of depth and resilience. They can withstand harsh circumstances, they tend to bottle things up, they will feel emotions emotions on a wild scale. They usually cannot express the extent of what they feel, so they either lash out or curl up instead, and they try to uncover people's secrets whilst keeping their own intact. The characters I applied to this zodiac sign are Kaiser and Hiyori. Both these characters can be related to this through their terrible upbringing of both abuse and neglect, but they both have withstood those harsh circumstances, and now they have their own separate instances of dealing with the complicated emotions. For Kaiser's sake, we regularly see him take his anger out on either Ness or himself through self-harm, and for Hiyori's case, he deals with the pain of it through isolation and gaming, seemingly presenting that curl-up option instead of lashing out. A lot of Hiyori's events were held mentally and never outright spoken to anyone on the pitch when he was subbed on for the Ubers game. Not to mention, Hiyori as a sadist would have fun uncovering what causes others pain, not to use it against them, no, but just out of curiosity and to remember it as a cause for someone lashing out. And for Kaiser's case, he will use people's talents combined with their insecurities to crush their dreams directly, supporting his urge for malice. Our next star sign to cover is actually my star sign, Sagittarius, which applies to those born between November 22nd and December 21st. This constellation is a fire sign. They possess the traits of inspiration and inclusion, they have big dreams and possibilities, they want the world to follow them as they strive towards something greater, they often hold tightly to truths that cannot be proven, which includes moral judgments, aesthetic judgments, decisions about applications of science, and conclusions about the supernatural, which are all outside the realm of science. And finally, these people can be overly assertive and completely unwilling to take in others' viewpoints on something they've decided is true. The characters I applied to this star sign are Ego, Shido, and Zantetsu. Ego holds the greatest amount of cause for a massive prospect to occur in the future since the start of the series. His inclusion has been the catalyst to many players seemingly being able to hang in the Louvre of the top world talents. His methods and ego is what he wants both Japan and by proxy the world to strive towards for a greater, more passion-driven football over the money-grabbing opportunity it has become. And he holds a sense of unwavering opinions towards a lot of football elements in which cannot be proven, but he will heavily interpret it as the truth to his diamonds in the rough. For Shido, it's really to do with his own philosophy and perspective. There surprisingly isn't a lot of lore to Shido, as he was one of the players just discovered by Armory off a whim, as he has no prior high school football team or any backstory to look into to associate him with any other star sign. So his perspective on life, and by proxy the sport that he plays, is a motivation for him to leave an imprint on the world, much like how mothers pass on their genes to their offsprings to continue their bloodline. And that kind of philosophy is one that he stands strongly by, that cannot be disproven, which leads me to relate this very constellation more to him than others. Zantetsu was a bit of a rogue one. I almost forgot to include him in this video, but judging by his limited intelligence but pure unwavering heart for the sport and background, I felt this was fitting. He was born into a family of science, as they are all highly intelligent and have doctorates, but he was never seen as an outcast or viewed as lesser by his family, even if he's not on that path, leaving him to interpret intelligence as a perspective that those who call people stupid are the real stupid ones, as it shows a sign of underestimation of what individuals can possibly do. Up next is Capricorn, and this applies to those born between December 22nd and January 19th. This constellation is an earth sign. They are deemed to hold a sense of responsibility. They get what needs to be done, all the while staying within the confines of their rules and traditions. They tend to separate themselves from others, and they struggle to see how things can improve/change. The characters I have closely related to the star sign are Sai, Chigiri, Bunny, Yukimiya, and Snuffy. Sai upholds a sense of responsibility, not only being his team's new Gen 11 midfielder, but also under the eyes of Luna as the future for Real in general, which is why Sai also gets done what needs to be done for the sake of his career, which means also giving up on his original dream to become a striker to fill the need to be a midfielder for his team's benefit. Well, at least that's the case for now, because we have no clue what Bunny's influence on Sai's career is. For Chigiri, I'm not sure if I have to go into too much detail, but his character traits have been changing to follow slowly back in the right track of becoming the best player in the world. From doing what needed to be done as a teammate and a passer to now no longer wanting to pass to people and score for himself, and having that strugglesome injury which weighs on him mentally on seeing how things could improve for an extended period of time. Similar to Chigiri, we have Yukimiya, who would definitely struggle to see how things could change. subscribe for more. He usually separates himself from the pack, especially in the NEL, and his whole presentation of being the one-on-one emperor definitely supports that. And he holds a sense of responsibility of achieving his career dream before his time runs out. So yeah, it's hard to see how things will get better when his career-ending condition is inevitable at the moment. Bunny is a character we don't have much intel on, but judging by his, well, vocalized suicidal statement, I could definitely foresee him playing for the sake of upholding a responsibility or request in which has made him lose personal enjoyment for the sport, as it's become more of an obligation rather than a thrill. So maybe through his lack of love and lifeless red eyes, he also lacks the hope of seeing how things can change for the better. Finally, we have Snuffy, who definitely was within the mindset of lacking enjoyment in his career upon his closest friend pulling a persona without the persona. He holds a responsibility as the current king of Ubers, but he of course was looking to pass on his duties, so that's a task he feels responsible in fulfilling and getting it done. Also, he's the person who most fits in this group, staying in the confines of rules and traditions, at least until Bari's rebellion, as he purely stuck to his strategies and tactics relentlessly, as if it was a solution to his team's issues at every turn. But you simply can't plan around a untraditional player or players and formations, as he doesn't have to play methodically in order to enjoy the sport, so he's unwilling to retire for a few more years to come at least. Nearing the end of this video, we next have the Aquarius star sign, which applies to those born between January 20th and February 18th. This constellation is an air sign. Those who fall under this star sign possesses traits of intellect and innovation. They try to find out things that govern what we do not yet understand. They tend to be contrarian and go up against the status quo. And finally, they desire to create a new normal and will not budge once it has been decided on such. The characters I have closely related to this star sign are Karasu and Charles. Charles doesn't really need explaining. We know he's a contrarian with no sense of normality in how he plays or acts. If you don't recognize this as well, you have not read the manga. However, for Karasu, he is intellectual and innovative for the purpose of using it to break other players down. His viewpoint on normal for a while was to target the weakest player on the pitch and break them down to their most useless state. We have seen this within the third selection. Karasu also has a non-traditional playstyle, using his arms in such a way for seamless dribbling and maintaining distance from his opponents, in which can be tricky because it can cause a foul if a mistake has been made. And lastly, Karasu described himself as a man with no talent, meaning he's purely a hard worker through it all, who through the norm of football conventions where geniuses dominate the field, he stands among the starting 11 still in Blue Lock, redefining the ordinary structure of teams as we know it. And last but certainly not least on our constellation list, we have Pisces, which applies to those born between February 19th and March 20th. This constellation is a water sign. Individuals with this sign have a strong sense of expansion and idealism. They try to connect everyone around them, even so far as working with people who have contradictory viewpoints. They are intuitive as they find what drives people easily, they are willing to sacrifice for the pursuit of their ideals, and they are sensitive and lacking boundaries, which can cause struggle to adjust and adapt. The characters I have closely related to the star sign are Bachelor, Anri, Kurina, Nanase, and Igarashi. To expand on some of these traits for certain characters, we see the likes of Bachelor, Kurina, and Nanase all try to connect with people around them at various points in the series, and for Bachelor and Nanase's case, working with characters like Rin who have contradictory viewpoints as the ego types do not match up. This also applies to Anri working in a business setting and working with ego, and when it comes to Igarashi, he is needed to connect to people in order to keep surviving somehow, with his goal always being limited to having a career away from his temple when working with players who strive to be the best. Once again, working with people with contradictory viewpoints. Also, the will to sacrifice for the pursuit of their ideals is something every character that I have mentioned has done at least once. For Bachelor, it was returning to zero by abandoning his monster for his own freedom. For Anri, it was putting aside her personal feelings and ruining a possible 299 other players' dreams for one solitary hero to follow with ego's methods, and possibly being fired from her position at the Japan Football Association Union. For Kurina, it was a shift in his path from being the 4th ranked player in the second selection to now accepting his place as a supporting role in the pursuit of helping Japan win a World Cup. For Nanase, it was working with Rin that was his own sacrifice, once again abandoning his dream for number 1 to settle as a pawn for Rin to use and barely get him to the next stage of Blue Lock and his career. And Igarashi had to constantly be undermined as he simply did not have the capabilities to keep up and willingly continued to be a one-trick pony for Bastard to stop Rin on multiple occasions from scoring, which is what finally led to him no longer being of use going forward. And for the final traits, Anri doesn't apply much here, but each character here has found what drives their teammates in one way or another, and they have all had struggles adjusting and adapting to new environments in certain instances. Anri has struggled from the start, but has learned to retain and study on information to a point where she still struggles, but is learning what qualities is needed to be a future coach. For Bachelor, once again, was within his time in the second selection when needing to move on from relying on his monster. For Kurona, it was adjusting to Isugi when he found a path beyond his original playstyle with Metavision, which had Kurona gas out on 2 separate occasions due to the intensity. For Nanase, it was finding a path to evolve and keep up, which basically led to him needing Rin to point out his unique weapon of natural ambidexterity. And for Igarashi, it was never realizing how lucky he had it, and he desperately needed to work harder on himself, not just for one skill that could be used for a limited capacity, but actually to function as a competent player within the NEL, as it was his last chance at achieving a big contract deal to stay away from his family's traditions. Anyway, that is all of the zodiac signs and their traits more appropriately paired with Blue Lock characters to match their traits. This was a longer video to put together, so my final request for you guys is to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and comment down below which characters aligns with you based off of your zodiac sign. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and until next time, peace.